When Karen arrived with her fake HOA police, ready to storm my property and serve me with what she called an official eviction, she was convinced she had finally outsmarted me. She claimed it was all non-compliance and ordered her squad to act like law enforcement, barging in and threatening arrest. But Karen didn't realize her reckless ploy would lead to something far more incriminating: an assault on an undercover state officer who had been quietly observing the chaos. What Karen thought would be my downfall turned out to be her ultimate undoing, and it was all caught on tape. She pulled up early in the morning, her convoy of pretend enforcers marching down the street like an amateur SWAT team. I stood watching from my porch as she stepped out of her sleek SUV, clipboard in hand, smugness radiating from every pore. She was dressed like a wannabe dictator-tailored blazer, perfectly pressed pants, and oversized sunglasses that masked the malice gleaming in her eyes. Karen thought she had the upper hand, but she was about to learn just how wrong she was. The first time I met Karen, she made it abundantly clear that she was not a person who would go unnoticed or unchallenged. I had just pulled into the neighborhood, moving van trailing behind me, stacked high with boxes that contained my entire life. Exhausted from the drive and fumbling to figure out where I could temporarily park while unloading, I barely stepped out of the driver's seat before I heard it. An abrupt and sharp shout that cut through the quiet suburban air like a siren. "Excuse me, you can't park that monstrosity here." I turned in confusion, my eyes landing on a woman marching toward me with the determination of someone leading an angry mobile, though, in this case, the mob was just her. Karen had a perfectly tailored blazer, sleek slacks, and the kind of sunglasses that screamed overcompensating, positioned firmly on her nose. Her clipboard was gripped tightly in her hand as though it were a weapon. She didn't wait for me to speak. "This is a residential neighborhood. We have rules. That eyesore is blocking the street." Her tone was sharp, each word emphasized with the precision of someone who truly believed she was the queen of everything within view. I glanced up and down the street. It was completely empty, not a single car in sight. Her outrage felt misplaced at best, fabricated at worst. "Two just moved in," I stammered, gesturing toward the van. "I'm unloading, trying to figure out where I should park. I'll move it as soon as I'm done." Karen's eyes narrowed, and she took one dramatic step closer, clipboard raised as if delivering judgment. "Figure it out before you inconvenience everyone else. You're obstructing the flow of traffic, and that's against community standards." I didn't know how to respond. I was tired, frustrated, and certainly not in the mood for an argument, but Karen had no intention of giving me a choice. Her entire demeanor radiated superiority as she looked me up and down, then scoffed as though my mere presence in her neighborhood was an insult to the pristine image she had crafted in her mind. I glanced at the moving van, then back at her. "There's no one here," I said, keeping my voice calm, despite my growing irritation. "I'll only be parked for a few hours. I promise I'll move it when I'm done." Karen tilted her head, the slightest smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. "A few hours? Do you think the rest of us don't have lives to live? This kind of selfish behavior is exactly why we have rules. If everyone parked wherever they wanted, chaos would ensue." I blinked, stunned by the sheer absurdity of her dramatics. "I don't think chaos is going to break out over a moving van," I replied, my tone cooler now. Karen pursed her lips, clearly offended that I wasn't groveling at her feet. "That's the problem with people like you. You don't think the rules apply to you." Before I could muster a response, she scribbled something onto her clipboard with furious precision, then ripped off the top sheet and thrust it toward me. "Consider this your first warning," she said, her tone dripping with disdain. "A violation fine. Maybe next time you'll think twice before disrupting our community." I stared at the piece of paper in disbelief. "A fine? I just got here. I didn't even know there were rules." Karen tilted her head again, her expression smug. "Ignorance isn't an excuse. If you'd bothered to read the HOA handbook, you'd know exactly what's expected of you." Her audacity left me speechless. I glanced at the fine, then back at her, wondering how someone could be so petty, so determined to exercise control over something so trivial. "I'll pay the fine when I finish unloading," I said through gritted teeth, stuffing the paper into my pocket. Karen sniffed, looking satisfied with herself, and turned on her heel to return to her pristine SUV, parked neatly across the street. As she walked away, she muttered loud enough for me to hear, "This is exactly why we have standards so people like him don't ruin the neighborhood." Standing there, clutching the ridiculous citation, I felt my frustration boiling over. I was too tired to argue, but deep down I knew this wasn't the end of Karen's interference in my life. She'd made herself known, and she clearly had no intention of backing down. Looking back, that encounter was just the beginning. Karen wasn't simply a bad neighbor, she was a storm brewing, a force of unrelenting control and drama. Her need for authority was insatiable, and anyone who didn't fit into her rigid vision of the perfect neighborhood was in her crosshairs. And unfortunately for her, I wasn't about to let her dictate my life. I had barely sipped my coffee before the pounding started up again. Whoever it was, they wanted to make their presence known, and they weren't going to leave until I answered. I peeked through the peephole, only to find a sight that immediately set off every alarm bell in my head. Standing on my porch were three individuals, dressed in matching navy blue polos emblazoned with gold patches that read "Neighborhood Enforcement." Their chests puffed out in exaggerated attempts at authority, and they all wore sunglasses despite the overcast sky. But the badges? They looked like something you'd order in bulk from an online costume shop. Leading the charge, of course, was Karen. Clipboard in hand, a smug look plastered across her face, she stood a few feet behind them, clearly reveling in whatever drama she had concocted. "Open up! We're here on official business," one of the fake cops barked, his voice lacking the steadiness of actual authority. I sighed, setting my coffee down. This was bound to be another one of Karen's ridiculous stunts. Ever since she became HOA president, she'd taken the title and stretched it into some bizarre fantasy where she ruled over the neighborhood with an iron fist. From pointless fines to passive-aggressive letters, Karen had made it her mission to make my life and everyone else's miserable. End quote. But this? A fabricated police force showing up at my door? This was a new low. I opened the door just a crack, enough to size them up without giving them a full view inside. "Can I help you?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. The man at the front stepped closer, sticking his foot against the frame as if to stop me from closing it. He was short, barrel-chested, and sported a mustache that twitched with irritation. "We're here to address your multiple violations of HOA regulations," he said sharply. "Your failure to comply means we're escalating to eviction." I raised an eyebrow, glancing from him to his companions. One was tall and lanky, his awkward stance betraying his nerves, while the other stood silently, gripping a plastic clipboard like it was a lifeline. Karen, of course, was grinning ear to ear in the background, clearly enjoying herself. "Eviction?" I repeated, the sheer absurdity of the claim forcing a laugh from me. "This is my house, not some rental property. You don't have the authority to evict anyone." The mustached man's expression darkened. "We've been given full authority by the HOA president to remove you from the premises if you don't comply immediately." I couldn't stop myself from glancing at Karen. "This is your idea, isn't it?" I said, my voice cutting through the air like a knife. "What is it this time? Too many flowers in the garden? My car parked 3 inches off center?" Karen stepped forward, her smugness now overflowing. "You've been out of compliance since the day you moved in," she snapped. "Your grass is too long, your trash cans aren't lined up properly, and don't even get me started on the color of your shutters. You're ruining the aesthetic of this neighborhood, and as president, it's my job to protect our standards." I pinched the bridge of my nose, exhaling slowly. "Karen, you don't have the power to send fake cops to someone's house. This is harassment." She ignored me, turning to her makeshift squad. "Proceed with the eviction," she ordered. To my disbelief, the mustached man and his team sprang into action. The tall one shoved the door open further, while the quiet one produced a zip-tie-style handcuff from his belt. "You've got 5 minutes to pack your things," Mustache Man declared. "We'll be supervising to ensure compliance." At that moment, my patience hit its limit. I stepped back, reaching into my pocket and pulling out my badge. With one fluid motion, I flipped it open, holding it up for all to see. "Federal Bureau of Investigation," I said, my voice low and steady. You're impersonating law enforcement, attempting to enter my home unlawfully, and threatening a federal officer. Care to explain yourselves?" The silence was deafening. The mustached man's bravado crumbled in an instant as he gawked at the badge. The tall man's hands froze mid-motion, his plastic handcuffs dangling uselessly. Even Karen seemed momentarily stunned, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "We're just following orders," the quiet one stammered, backing away. "From her?" I asked, gesturing toward Karen. Karen quickly recovered, her face twisting into a mask of indignation. "This is all perfectly legal," she shrieked, pointing her clipboard at me like it was some kind of magic wand. "You're the one breaking the rules, not me. I'll have you arrested for defying the HOA." I took a step forward, narrowing my eyes. "Karen, you can't arrest anyone, and now you've just implicated yourself in a criminal act. Congratulations." The mustached man took a nervous step back, muttering something under his breath before bolting down the driveway. His two companions followed, tripping over each other in their haste to escape. Karen, however, stood her ground, her smugness giving way to fury. "This isn't over," she yelled, her voice cracking as she jabbed her finger at me. "You'll regret this." "Not as much as you're about to," I replied, watching her storm off. As they disappeared down the street, I couldn't help but shake my head. Karen had overplayed her hand, and this time there was no backing out of the consequences she'd set into motion. Whatever her next move was, I'd be ready. After all, she wasn't just dealing with any neighbors, was dealing with someone who knew how to take down fraudsters like her in their sleep. The black SUV was back, parked at an angle that screamed deliberate intent. Its engine hummed softly, and the man inside was now talking to the woman from the HOA, the same woman who had stood on my doorstep earlier, clipboard in hand, issuing threats disguised as procedure. I watched them from my window, my pulse quickening. This wasn't paranoia anymore. Something was happening, and it wasn't good. I stepped outside, letting the screen door slam behind me. My frustration was no longer hidden, it was written all over my face. The man in the SUV noticed me immediately, his cold, calculating gaze locking onto mine. He wasn't a neighbor, I'd never seen him before, but his presence sent a ripple of unease through my chest. "Excuse me," I called out, keeping my tone neutral but firm. "Can I help you with something?" The man glanced at the woman, then back at me. "This is a private matter," he said flatly, stepping in front of her as if to shield her from me. I didn't back down. "I'm the one who lives here," I said, my voice steady. "I have a right to know what's going on. Who are you people?" The woman stepped forward, her expression smug. "You're being uncooperative," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "You've been given notice. We're following procedure. You need to leave." "No," I replied firmly. "I'm not leaving. I haven't done anything wrong." Her smirk widened, and something about it made my skin crawl. "That's not for you to decide," she said, her voice sharp. The more I looked at her, the more I saw it the subtle, racially charged way she was handling this. If I weren't black, would she be acting the same way? Would she be so quick to issue an eviction notice without real cause? The thought burned in my mind, fueling the sense of injustice that had been building since the moment she showed up at my door. "Get off my property," I said, the words coming out sharper than I intended. The man stepped forward, positioning himself between me and the woman. "You need to calm down," he said, his tone low and threatening. I narrowed my eyes. "I'm calm, but I'm not leaving." He stepped closer, his posture shifting into something dangerous. "Maybe you don't understand. You're not in charge here. We are." The tension was thick, the air heavy with unspoken threats. His posture told me he was ready to escalate, and I didn't know if he was bluffing or if he was willing to take this further. "Are you threatening me?" I asked, my voice low and steady. He didn't answer, but his fist tightened at his side. That's when I saw the small bulge under his jacket. A gun. It was barely visible, but it was there. "I suggest you leave," the man said again, his voice too calm, too controlled. "This could go easier for you if you just follow the rules." I clenched my fists, my instincts screaming at me. This wasn't about offense or noise complaints. This was about power, control, and the worst part, they thought they could use it against me because of who I was. I'm not going anywhere, I said, stepping forward and narrowing the space between us. You don't get to intimidate me. The shift in his eyes was immediate. He didn't expect this. I'd been calm too long, letting him think he could control the situation. But I'd had enough. He reached for something, and before I could react, the woman pulled out her phone, her thumb moving over the screen like she was recording. Her smug smile told me she thought she had something on me. Then the worst happened. The man lunged, shoving me hard in the chest. The force knocked me back, but I was steady years of training kicking in. I didn't fall. I braced myself, but something shifted. I pushed back, and his arm caught mine awkwardly. He stumbled, and in the confusion, he fell his head, hitting the ground with a sickening crack. It was only then that I saw the recording. The woman had captured it all: the assault, the shove, the entire confrontation. The reality crashed down like a wave. This wasn't just an eviction anymore. They'd crossed the line. The woman stood frozen, her phone still in her hand. I could hear the hum of the SUV's engine start up again, and I knew they were trying to escape. I pulled out my phone, quickly dialing my supervisor. "This is over now," I said, my voice steady but firm. "You're done. I'll be reporting this." The woman tried to play it off, her voice shaky. "You're making a mistake." "No," I interrupted. "You're the one who's made a mistake. The footage from your phone, the bruises, the shoving, the unlawful eviction notice, it's all there, and I'm not letting this go." Karen's downfall was nothing short of spectacular, and she didn't go quietly. The courtroom was packed, the tension palpable as the evidence against her was laid bare. Karen sat at the defendant's table, her face twisted in fury, her clipboard nowhere to be seen, a rare moment of vulnerability for the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA. "This is a witch hunt," she screamed, slamming her hands on the table. "I was protecting the neighborhood. These rules exist for a reason." The judge raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "Miss Thompson, the evidence clearly shows you fabricated eviction notices, misused HOA funds, and orchestrated a fraudulent police force to intimidate residents. This is not about protecting the neighborhood, it's about your abuse of power." Karen shot to her feet, her voice shrill. "Abuse of power? I was doing what no one else had the guts to do, keeping this community in line, and now you're punishing me for it? This is outrageous." I sat in the gallery watching her unravel. She turned to glare at me, her eyes blazing with hatred. "This is your fault," she spat, pointing a trembling finger in my direction. "You think you're so clever, don't you? You think you've won? Well, let me tell you something, you haven't seen the last of me." I leaned back in my seat, arms crossed, and smirked. "Karen, you've already lost. The evidence speaks for itself. You can scream all you want, but it won't change the facts." Her face turned red, veins bulging in her neck as she struggled to find words. "You're a liar, a fraud. You don't belong in this neighborhood, and you never did." The judge slammed his gavel, cutting her off. "Miss Thompson, you will remain silent or be held in contempt of court." Karen huffed, collapsing back into her chair, muttering under her breath. "This is a joke, a complete joke." The verdict was swift. Karen was stripped of her HOA presidency, fined heavily, and sentenced to community service. As the judge read out her punishment, Karen's composure crumbled. She buried her face in her hands, shaking her head in disbelief. "This isn't fair," she wailed, her voice cracking. "I was doing what was best for the community. You're all blind. Blind." The bailiff approached her, gesturing for her to stand. Karen hesitated, then rose slowly, her shoulders slumped in defeat. As she was escorted out of the courtroom, she turned one last time to glare at me. "You'll regret this," she hissed, her voice venomous. "Mark my words. You'll regret this." I met her gaze, unflinching. "Karen, the only thing I regret is not stopping you sooner."